Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's professional learning session sponsored by Ballard and Ty. I'm Emily Sumner, and I'll be your host today, and we are looking forward to sharing strategies for using assessment data to inform targeted intervention with your English learners. Before we begin, I'm going to review a few tips to help the webinar run smoothly for you. The GoToWebinar platform does not have a group chat, but you can send in your questions and any feedback. We are going to be holding a Q&A period at the end of the webinar. So again, do welcome your questions. To ask a question, just find that Q&A icon on your control panel, click it, type your question in, and send it in to me. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please send me a note using that questions feature, and I'll do my best to resolve the problem for you. One thing you can do right now to make the webinar run smoothly is to close all of the other applications on your computer. So all of your internet browser tabs, Word, PowerPoint, any Acrobat applications. I know that's tough to do, but when you close everything except for GoToWebinar, that just ensures all your internet bandwidth and computer power go to GoToWebinar, and that can really smooth out any video or audio lags. If you do have lags that last more than a second or two, you can log out of GoToWebinar and come right back in, and that usually resets the connection for you. We are recording today's webinar, so if you're not able to stay the whole time or you want to share it with folks or just don't want to take notes and want to refer back to it, we'll be sending that recording to you by email tomorrow along with the slide deck and your certificate of attendance. So keep your eye on your inbox tomorrow, and we'll also be posting those materials to the Ballard and Ty website. All right, now we'd like to get just a little bit of input from you. We've got two polls that we'd like you to answer. And the first is, which type of teacher and student materials did you prefer to use pre-pandemic? So I'm going to launch that poll and give you a few seconds to put in your answer. All right, I'm just going to give it 5 more seconds and we'll see how folks responded. All right, let's take a look. Looks overwhelmingly that most of you prefer web-based and paper-based materials together prior to the pandemic, and next in the running, but pretty far behind is the paper-based preference at 17%. So our next question is similar, but it's which type of materials do you prefer to use now, now that we're still somewhat in the midst of the pandemic? So again, we'll give you a few seconds to answer this question. And we'll see how those answers compare. All right, about 5 more seconds. All right, let's take a look. And still in the lead, web-based and paper-based together, and none of you preferring paper-based now. That web-based really popped up to number 2, which is not surprising. So thank you so much for sharing that information with us. Super helpful and interesting to see how things are going for everybody out there. All right, so I think we are ready to get started, and I'm going to welcome Brenda Huey-Rosas to join me on screen and get us started. Hi, Brenda, welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Brenda's an educational consultant with Ballard and Ty, and she is going to be your instructor today. And so I'm going to go ahead and let her get us started.
All right. So my name is Brenda Huey-Rosas, and I have been actually in language learning, language teaching for a long time. I have a bachelor's in Chinese, the language, which is not very useful, but a master's of arts in English, TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other languages. So that is truly my passion, teaching ESL, but also languages in general. I actually speak 5 different languages. I have spent 15 years in secondary EL multi-level classrooms teaching. I've also done a lot of product development for curriculum as well as assessment. And I actually started the blended learning approach in 2009, which means I taught with digital web-based materials in the classroom along with paper-based materials. And then sometimes I would tell them to put it away and take it back out. And the students and teachers were digital at the same time. So I know a lot of you are experiencing this now or have done it last year. but I've been doing it for a really long time and actually prefer it, blended learning. Right. Today we are going to look at the IPT. The IPT is our assessment platform, and what that does is you can do listening and speaking, oral tests with your students, as well as reading and writing assessments for your students to, of course, identify placement or even redesignate. You can use it for progress monitoring, so you can use it maybe twice a year, at the beginning of the school year, middle of the school year, and if you want just 2 different times to compare results. But we are really going to look today at the diagnostic reports. There are individual student diagnostic reports that come up or generate when you give an oral assessment, so listening and speaking, and also the reading and writing. We're going to spend a lot more time on the oral because it does give recommendations for curricular interventions or more so targeted instruction. So we are going to look at those a little bit more closely and how you can use your materials or our materials using those examples to show you tangible teaching examples to target instruction and basically do it as intervention. Why is this important? This past year, any year, but this past year, we were teaching a lot of us remotely, and students will, have different holes. Maybe gaps. They couldn't write as much on paper, or we couldn't see as much of the progress they have been making, or we didn't have enough time for listening and speaking. So as teachers, every year, even in a regular year, we want to see what are the weaknesses of students and do targeted intervention to help them in those weaknesses. Here's an example of our online IPT individual diagnostic report. What you'll see here is, of course, the level. So as a regular assessment and any assessment, you will get the level of proficiency. So for example, an intermediate student. But that is not enough information to know how to target their areas of weakness. Here are some can-do descriptors of what a leveled intermediate student can do for oral. More importantly, you're going to see here, these are the questions that the students answered. The green are the ones that they got correct, and the red are the ones that they didn't get correct. So trying to see what that question was specifically asking for example, body parts or weather or occupations. Things like verbs, simple present, or giving rationale and supporting details for a specific reading for language functions. So these will help us narrow down their weaknesses, and in that way, we can then target a student's weaknesses. Now, a lot of us don't have small group or one-on-one where we could target one student individually, but if we flip through the different individual student diagnostic reports, tally up maybe the most common weaknesses, we can target it more as a group. In the IPT report, you will see an area for vocabulary recommendation. So these are the weaknesses for vocabulary. These are the recommendations. So you're going to see occupations or clothing and accessories, food, body parts. These are the categorical type vocabulary, thematic language that students may have some weaknesses in. You could then see intervention from carousel of ideas. That is our Ballard and Ty K-5 or K-6 curricular set of materials. And it'll tell you unit 4 or these specific page numbers are the ones you can go over. If you look down below, you'll see creative ideas and frames for fluency. We will be looking at examples from all of these today. Grammar recommendations, you'll see things like countable, uncountable nouns generally taught through food, or present tense versus present progressive, right? So we know that students have weaknesses. Here is a list, almost like a check mark list that you can go through and cover each weakness. You'll see again the intervention from carousel. If you don't have carousel, if you don't have our materials, you can always use your materials to do some review or targeted intervention. We also have comprehension recommendation. This is important whenever you read. So something like reading and reciting a poem or rhyme or a chant, or reading a fictional or a non-fictional article to answer factual comprehension or critical reading questions. These are going to be important. Again, intervention from our materials. Now, for 6 through 12, you might be wondering, well, why are we only looking at K-6? This report specifically is for a K-6 student. If it is a 6th through 12th or a middle school or high school student, it will say intervention from champion of ideas, which is our upper secondary, so basically secondary curriculum. Language functions. This is really how you attack academic language. You are going to see functions such as expressing likes and dislikes, making predictions, identifying and describing characters and settings. All of these are super important. Sequencing events. This is usually what you'll see in your standards, what students need to do. You're going to see here all the interventions from carousel and the page numbers. Okay, so we looked at the report. You know that you have assessments from your, states or schools that you have to give. And sometimes you just get information on what level they are. Well, we want to know what their weaknesses are. So you can always use our IPT assessment, but again, that might not be possible. So here is a quick assessment. This is something I've tried in the classroom that I just love, just because it's zero teacher prep and it really does give me a lot of information. You can do a speaking prompt. In a speaking prompt, you can ask, what are you excited about this year, right? It might then be written in present progressive tense, right? We are reading something. But if you want to check for past tense, maybe higher levels, you can ask a question like, what did you do this past weekend? What did you do over the summer? Whatever your writing prompt is, it will allow for a student to, well, it will kind of narrow it in for a student to write in a specific verb form. So just keep that in mind. But when you look at a speaking prompt, sorry, I think I might have said writing, but in a speaking prompt, you will have students talk about some kind of content, use vocabulary, and use grammar. Same thing with a writing prompt. So you can ask the same question for speaking, the same question for writing, take notes on how they're doing in speaking. Maybe you just put all the weaknesses and just start jotting it down every time you hear an incorrect grammar form. Or maybe they used a word incorrectly, or their level of vocabulary in blank thematic area is not as high as you would like it. You can jot that down. In writing, it's a little bit easier because they'll turn in something to you. You could then circle all the errors for comprehension for vocabulary as well as grammar forms. So if you circle and you see a lot of present tense errors, you know you need to target present tense. If you know that this is about occupations and they didn't know any of the words for the names of occupations, you can go over something like that. But once you circle all the errors, how do you really know how their comprehension or their use of language function is? That is a little bit more difficult, and that really leads into that academic realm, which is why you can then do a reading, talk about comprehension, see if they can categorize, sequence, different things like that. So you might have to do the different assessments for that. But that is just some ideas for assessment and doing it quickly. Once you have the assessment and you know exactly what you need to target, it's very important to then find some materials. Maybe it's our materials, which we will talk about. But if you have materials in general, any curriculum, you can look up different themes, find the different chapters and topics, maybe teach vocabulary with images, and then find a reading, have the vocabulary in a specific context. But you always want to target reading, writing, listening, and speaking, all 4 skills. You can look at a scope and sequence. Maybe there's a scope and sequence for grammatical forms or all the different chapters. Maybe the language functions are there. Another way is to look at each individual lesson. This might take a little bit longer, but you can look at the objectives of those individual lessons and see what it's covering there. Intervention with our materials is fairly easy just because we've done a lot of it for you in the IPT. But also in every set of materials, we do have a scope and sequence or a list of objectives that you can refer to find out what you want to cover. It's a little bit easier to find. We are going to look at that later on. Okay, so I could just talk to you and say all of this, but I really want to give you real examples. At this point, I do want to mention that throughout this year, we are going to be doing mini videos or mini writings or mini webinars about how to do some real tangible examples from our different sets of materials. Using that as an example, you can actually just teach, maybe take some screenshots of the slides here and actually teach and try some of these activities out with your class, or you can look into some of our materials if you would like. We are going to do occupations today. So it says intervention from carousel of ideas. So occupations, right? Jobs. It's going to tell me the page numbers. It's also going to say refer to creative ideas and frames for fluency. So let's look at how all of this works together for a K-5 audience. All right. So our materials, carousel. So you're going to have page 518 to 524. So we know that in the teacher guide, it's going to explain a whole lesson in detail. Our teacher guides are fully scripted. You are going to then see, we're going to use a theme picture, which are these pictures right here. Very great for a springboard for language. Picture and word cards are going to be these right here. You're going to have images as well as vocabulary words. And frames for fluency, so the teacher guides as well as the sentence frames. Creative ideas are worksheets that are basically workbooks, and they are really helpful for vocabulary practice as well as grammar, form, and function, really helping the students to do a little bit more independent practice. So occupations, let's see how all this is put together. Here's a screenshot of the teacher guide for Carousel of Ideas, again, K to 5. It's going to tell you that you need a theme picture such as this. And then we are going to see the blue that's going to tell you what to do and the green that's fully scripted. So let's try this. I'm not going to read the scripting just because I can't. I'm very bad at scripting. I like to paraphrase and kind of get the gist of it. So basically, this is a picture of a busy street. We can say the street is busy, right? Because a lot of people are working. And we're saying people are working because of occupations. So this man is a trash collector, and we explain what that is. This woman over here is a salesperson. Oh, sorry, this woman over here is a salesperson. She's selling maybe memberships to the gym. You're going to then see a bank teller and talk about, how the bank teller helps people put money in the bank or take it out. And then we talk about banks in general. So you could see how easy this is to teach through this theme picture, right? Here is the theme picture in color. You are able to project this onto the screen and point to the trash collector, point to the bank teller. You're going to see a salesperson, and now this picture is slightly different. It's going to have the boxer as well as a cashier for the grocery store, and of course the taxi driver. Okay. After that, that's presentation. We then want students to practice where we interact with students. So you're going to see picture cards as well as the theme picture, and you're going to show it and say, this is a cashier. Where is the cashier in this big picture? Okay, so for example, this is a cashier, and then we'll kind of point them to that. You're going to write the following sentences on the board. So is this a bank teller? No, she is not a bank teller. So here I'm reading the scripting, right? Is this a boxer? Yes, he is a boxer. So I would just point to the theme picture while reading the scripting. Here are some picture and word cards just to give you some examples of here's how we teach trash collector or boxer or a cashier. So the idea is you use images with the lowest level students to teach the vocabulary, and then maybe the words for higher level students to teach them, the words maybe to read it and then give a sample sentence. All right. Next, still practicing, we are going to write the following sentences on the board. Is the bank teller blank, right? Yes or no. So we're going to hold up the theme picture and say, is the bank teller driving a truck? No, the bank teller is not driving a truck. Is the trash collector walking on the street? Yes, the trash collector is walking on the street. So we're using these sentence frames to then practice again with the theme picture. Does everybody see here? Be sure to use present progressive tense in your questions. So not only are we focusing on vocabulary and occupations, we are always doing some kind of grammar, form, and function whenever we use sentence frames. Apply and extend is the third part of Carousel. It's presentation, practice, then apply and extend. Here, it's some kind of oral communication practice, maybe even some writing, but we are going to have a discussion about jobs, whether a specific job is easy or difficult. This is important to get students to think about occupations in the future. I have a 6-year-old. She always changes her occupation daily, from architect to zoologist to a veterinarian. No, I don't want to see an animal sick. Let's just be a zoologist. No, I think I'm going to draw buildings. Now I want to be a fashion designer. Mommy, I want to be a sculptor. So, you know, any age, they are starting to talk about occupation. So we want to give them some ideas of what is an easy job? What is a difficult job? Maybe a truck driver seems like an easy job, but they have long hours. They're driving all night and they're away from their families for a long period of time. So the deeper you can go into this conversation, obviously, the more oral communication practice you are doing. All right. Now, here's the back of that theme picture, a busy street. What is so great about these theme pictures that's incorporated with Carousel, but also with Frames for Fluency, is they have multi-level options. So let's look into this. Beginning level, is this the bank teller? Is this the cashier or the boxer? Yes, no, either or questions, right? One word answers. The higher level, maybe a level 2 or early intermediate, you'll have listening and speaking options here, as well as reading and writing. So who is she? What is she doing? These are going to be pointing at the pictures and talking about them, but these students may need to be able to respond in at least a sentence, right? Maybe comparing and contrasting the people in the theme picture. How are the trash collector alike, or trash collector and truck driver alike? You can also talk about how they're different. So comparing and contrasting is a very good skill. It's a language function, right? So you do want them to practice this. Then for reading and writing, you might say, she is a salesperson. What does a salesperson do? And then have them write that response. Maybe you model it first, or they write sentences on their own. Intermediate, you're going to have them write a journal. So you could see here, where do you think the truck driver is going? What is the man buying from the salesperson? So inference, right? Forming opinions. Early advanced, they might be writing a paragraph responding to one of these questions. What do you think would happen if? So a hypothetical question, having them be a little bit more creative using complex and compound sentences. In advance, they might research a topic. They might then write an essay about it. I always love having a digital slide that they put all these pictures on to then talk about an occupation and maybe even present it to the class. So here you'll see a lot of different activities for multi-level. If you want, you could take a snapshot of this screen and try it in class and see what you think. All right, again, here is that theme picture that we were talking about. So that was the back of the theme picture. Okay, so I want to now kind of transition over to Frames for Fluency. That was Carousel. Frames for Fluency and Carousel work exactly together to create a more rounded program, comprehensive and rigorous. But sometimes we might just want to pull out Frames for Fluency by itself and just do the Frames for Fluency activity. Those you'll see are aligned to Carousel, so you'll see the page number. But these are really more for, you know, can students practice a little bit more oral communication? I'm going to invite Emily back on here with me. She's going to pretend she's a student. With Frames for Fluency, there is a I do it, we do it, you do it model always. So here in Carousel, you'll say like, this is the cashier. Where's the cashier in this big picture? Very good, right? But we want them to practice this speaking a little bit more. So I do it. I'm going to point to the people in the theme picture. We'll try number 15. And I might say something like, let me go to the picture. Is this the boxer? And then as a teacher, I say, yes, this is the boxer. So I am modeling that. So Emily, I'm going to have you use the sentence frame, is this a blank? Okay, or I might say that actually. And then I'll have you answer. How about that? You will say yes or no. So is this the taxi driver?
Yes, that's the taxi driver.
Yep. So yes, he is the taxi driver. Yes, he is a taxi driver, right? Or she might have said, no, he is not a taxi driver. If I pointed to Emily, is he the taxi driver?
No, he's not the taxi driver.
All right. And is this, see, very bad with following scripted, but you will probably do a better job. So thank you so much. Emily will then you do it. So she will by herself or with a partner practice this with her partner, and maybe they'll write down the dialogue and then present it to the class. All right, thank you so much, Emily. That was Frames for Fluency activity number 1. The second activity you'll see coincides with the Carousel teacher guide. And this is the part like, is the bank teller driving a truck, right? So you'll see here all of those frames for that. and you could see the I do it, we do it, you do it. Frames for Fluency is awesome. There is zero teacher prep whenever doing Frames for Fluency. It also adds that extra layer of oral practice with carousel, okay? So here you'll see present progressive verb tense. Remember we talked about how whenever you're doing a topic, you are covering a sentence frame that's going to then practice a grammar form and then a language function. So again, I do it, we do it, you do it. You can practice theme picture number 15 as well as theme picture number 16. And here is that Frames for Fluency activity number 2. Moving on to Frames for Fluency number 3, here's a snapshot of what theme picture 16 might look like. And I might ask again, so now this is just the present tense, right? Answering questions in complete sentences, sorry. All right, so where does the painter work? So here's a painter, and it says she works inside, she works outside, right? That can be both. So I might say, where does the lifeguard work? The lifeguard work, so maybe inside or outside. So she or he works inside or outside, right? So you can see this picture. There are a lot of people of different occupations kind of milling around here at this pool party. So the idea is using that image to then speak about that. I do want to mention Frames for Fluency is not only for K to 6. You can use it for 6 through 12 newcomers, right? Maybe first 3-4 months, hit it hard. All you do is Frames for Fluency. Get that grammar, vocabulary going, maybe some language functions, and then it bridges into some kind of curriculum with rigor that you may already have, or something like Champion that we have. But just to let you know, Frames for Fluency, K to 5, but also newcomers 6 through 12. Okay. Here's an example of that pool party. So the theme picture you're going to see here, again, with all the listening and speaking, reading and writing at that level, and then the different levels. So different writing prompts. I may not have said this earlier, but basically what you do is you can, as a whole class or a small group, ask different students different questions based on their proficiency level, have them answer it, and then later split everybody off to then do a writing, to then read their writing to the class, right? So they're listening to speak, to then write, to then read their writing. So those are your 4 skills, all integrated. All right, in Frames for Fluency, you are going to have an extension box in that chapter. You will have maybe a recommended reading, jobs from A to Z. So you'll now put the occupations into context, right? There's also something called a literature connection, which is very important because we can talk about reading skills, and later we'll look at creative ideas. Oh, maybe right now. Now we're going to look at creative ideas. So you're going to see identify. So basically you will have the vocabulary to practice with students for all the occupations. In creative ideas, they are books. So workbooks for the different levels, and they coincide with like Frames for Fluency and carousel of ideas. So let's look at this. You might do some listening and repeating, some making of sentences, and then also like putting different constructions together, almost like sentence frames. Okay. All right. So with grammar, you are going to see that we have different topics that we can cover. Again, reviewing that it can be with carousel of ideas, right? Language functions, again, carousel of ideas. I know we saw this earlier, but it's important to note again, well, what do we do with the rest of this? Comprehension, you're going to then see fiction. You can definitely pull out some different fiction or informational text stories. But all of that can be done through Frames for Fluency for K to 12 intervention. There is a scope and sequence. Now, every time I talk about Frames for Fluency, not only do I love Frames for Fluency, the scope and sequence is super powerful. It is going to help you work on those specific areas that you saw the grammar recommendations for, as well as a literature connection. So this is Frames for Fluency, just the 2 very easy to use teacher guides, the sentence frames. You're going to then have the word and picture cards and the theme pictures. This is only for K to 12 and supplemental only. So you can pull it out just as Frames for Fluency. Let's look at this. This is an IPT report for Champion of Ideas. you're going to see this is the 6th to 12th, right? So red level is going to be part of Champion. It'll give you ideas there. But you can also use frames for fluency, plurals. I could then look up plurals in my scope and sequence for frames for fluency. Here you'll see plurals, all the different activities that are done just for plurals. Here is an example of 2.4.1, okay? So we can do regular plurals with S and IES. So this might be a picture of animals, right? So the puppy is here. The puppies, IES, are there. So you can use the theme picture again, talk about the sentence frames, I do it, we do it, you do it model, and just stop everything you're doing. This is how I always explain it to teachers. You just taught plurals 3 weeks ago. Every day since then, you've been reminding them, so much so you just want to pull your hair out. That is when you stop everything, go into frames for fluency, use it as intervention, and just teach plurals. You don't have frames for fluency? Go into your set of materials, look for the plurals, review all the activities just for plurals, and hope that you will not see those errors anymore. All right. You can also then go into the teacher guide for carousel and do more extended activities for those plurals. All right. Now, language functions also can be targeted with frames for fluency. Let's look at that. All right. So you might have to identify a sequence of events, right? Or talk about people and places and contrast them in a specific model. So compare and contrast is a language function. Compare and contrast is going to be in Champion Teacher Guide 303, page 303. Here's a snapshot of that, again, with the scripting. So you might show a picture or a guide 1718, basically a digital resource, and it's going to have breakfast pictures. Nancy has a big breakfast. Kim has a bigger breakfast. Mario has the biggest breakfast. So big, bigger, biggest. So that is Champion, but we can also do frames for fluency, comparing and contrasting. So here you'll see I do it, we do it, you do it model. An airplane is bigger or faster than a bicycle, right? So here you'll see that you are comparing and contrasting different modes of transportation. So I could say something like an airplane is faster than a car. And then I could say airplanes fly in the air, but trains travel on the ground. So how do these modes of transportation travel? Comparing and contrasting, super important for students, using just picture and word cards to teach them that. And then you'll see carousel again. You can go into carousel if you're working with K to 6, or Champion if you're working with middle school, high school. Here are some more activities for comparing and contrasting. You're going to see temperature, as well as comparing and contrasting structures for different things. So the idea here is that you are going to do I do it, we do it, you do it, using the different, maybe materials for comparing and contrasting, and then showing them how to practice all of this. Comparing and contrasting is generally done with Venn diagrams. So if you want to do that, you can show them visually a little bit more with that. All right. Moving on to comprehension, you are going to see the pre-reading is super important, like predicting or pointing out different things for keywords and phrases, simple sentences. You are going to have to clarify meaning, have them work for a specific purpose, always reading skills, right? So here you'll see literature connections. In the teacher guide, in the appendix for frames for fluency, there might be a literature connection for predicting. What you will do there is have students maybe look at an image of the book or a picture in the book and predict what is going to happen in the book or what is going to happen next in the story. But these sentence frames that can be used in frames for fluency are really awesome in working with students for that. So predicting is one of the literature connections. Confirming the predictions. So you predict something, you found out now. Please, whenever using these, try having the students speak about it first and then write about it and then share their answers. Their literature connections are who, what, where, when, why, the 5 V's. You can then maybe have a reading that they do, pull out the who, what, where, when, why, have them use these sentence frames to then write a summary. Character study and setting. These are going to be important when you have them describe about a character or a setting in the story. You are going to see that you use this a lot in stories. And main ideas and details. So again, Frames for Fluency is very, very good at targeting, again, grammar, form, and function, literature connections, oral, listening, and speaking to then write, and then do some reading of the writing. But we also have an IPT assessment for reading and writing. So here you'll see some recommendations at the end of that individual student diagnostic report, where you can pull out what are some recommendations for limited English reading, what are some recommendations for English writing. Some of the things I just talked about will be helpful, but you can pick any text and maybe practice reading out loud and then check for understanding, which I'm sure we all do. But different things like mixing it up, where you can use a content area reading, right, to practice that, or have different elements where we talk about multiple meanings of words or meanings of phrases, and then here you'll see logical sequence of events. Again, you could use those literature frames to do that. In writing, you can always have students talk about, vocabulary and syntax and correct spelling, but you may want to show model paragraphs or sentences for writing so that they can see what it should look like to then they create their own. So we have different recommendations for curricular materials for reading and writing. I did go over this slide last webinar. If you want to go look into that a little bit further, you may, but you'll see here with reading, just some of the snapshots. We have a hands-on English set of materials for kindergarten, first grade, maybe second, very, very low newcomers. Every chapter has a fiction as well as an informational text. Those readings, you're going to see a lot of comprehension skills, reading skills practice there. Carousel, we've been talking about that from 2nd to 5th grade, content-based reading with comprehension questions as well. Champion of Ideas, 6 through 12, secondary, a lot of rigor. You're going to see a lot of reading for all the different reading genres, fiction, informational text, even some graphic comics, right? You'll then see writing recommendations. Hands-on English has English maths. These are really great. Students can write. They do vocabulary to then do comprehension questions. We'll look at this very quick shortly. Frames for Fluency is what we've been talking about a lot here. Theme pictures, speak to write, grammar, form, and function. Carousel, those academic writing tasks and editing is even talked about there. And then Champion for academic writing. In the teacher guide that's fully scripted, you're going to see all of that academic happen. All right. That is the end of basically showing you examples and our review. But just to review some of our materials, we have hands-on English, again, for K to 1, maybe 2nd grade, super low beginners. There's a program guide that's going to teach you all the different activities. It's very activity-based. It's going to keep the kids active. It's a super cute program. You're going to see teacher guides that are all fully scripted, a teacher's e-port, so you could show slides, word and picture cards, sentence frames, as well as the big book. So you have the option of using paper-based as well as digital materials. Excuse me. Hands-on English is really going to keep your students going and helping with that interaction. English maths we talked about. You're going to see vocabulary as well as comprehension questions for students to speak to write. They can do the writing. You can have them put it on the walls or even take it home. Carousel of ideas. We did a lot of talking about this. These are the examples. You'll see the worksheets as well as the sentence frames from Frames for Fluency, the theme pictures, as well as the word and picture cards. Frames for Fluency, again, this is what we were talking about earlier with the easy to use teacher guides, sentence frames, word and picture cards, and theme pictures. Champion of Ideas for secondary, a digital version. You're going to definitely see that. I know a lot of you were talking about web-based materials. Champion of Ideas has that, but also paper-based. Secondary, rigorous, aligned to standards, and really great with content. And lastly, IPT, those are the ones that are going to generate your reports. So if you are interested in IPT language proficiency tests, definitely check this out for placement as well as those individual student diagnostic reports. So if you are interested in the IPT, please contact Lori Hill, my colleague. She will be happy to help you with the IPT and explain to you, show you how that can work, and you can look a little bit more closely into those individual student diagnostic reports. If you liked any of the instructional programs that I just showed you, please contact me, reach out. We can talk about it, the demo, how it can fit for your programs. Or if you have general questions on curriculum, Brenda, how do I align what I have to, what you were talking about? I'd be happy to meet with you and talk about that. All right, at this point, I'm going to bring Emily back on to do the Q&A.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brenda, as usual. This was super helpful and informative. And I just want to reiterate to folks that Brenda really is available all the time to help you out. So if you have questions, obviously about Ballard and Ty curricular programs, absolutely reach out. But she is more than willing to just talk about helping you help your English learners. So definitely keep that contact information close and reach out to her when you need her. And we do have some questions that have come in, and feel free, folks, to send in more, but we'll just go ahead and get started with what we have. And this is just a question that everybody has. How do we balance the importance of formative English language proficiency assessment with assessment/test overload?
All right. I love this question just because I am a teacher who loves informal assessment just as much as formal. So with the IPT, for example, you can only give it twice. It's not like every 4 weeks, every 8 weeks, right? And if you just give the oral one, you'll get those individual student diagnostics, and all you really need is once to kind of take you through the year. We have to give standardized assessment, right? That's part of what we do. And sometimes I think we have to give it just to give it for placement, but why not give something that gives you information for targeted intervention, right? So other than that, you have your chapter tests at the end of a chapter, which are great, but informal assessment, every time they speak, every time they write a sentence, collect all of those. That will allow you to not pressure the students and make them feel like they're tested all the time. But every time they speak for you, every time they write for you, that is an assessment right there of how they're doing. Circle their errors, only focus on the errors.
That's helpful. And actually, you answered another question that had come in, which is how often can these assessments be administered? So I think you said 2 times a year for that one.
Yep.
And that dovetails into a question around, can IPT be used for progress monitoring?
Yeah. So progress monitoring twice a year. You'll then see how students progress into that kind of maybe next few points that they got or the next level. So what's really great is when you can progress monitor but know how to get them to that next level. So again, going back to the individual student diagnostic reports, you really want students to be able to or teachers to know what to target to get them to that next level, and those reports will really be beneficial.
Okay. And how long does IPT take to administer?
Yep, great question. For the oral assessment, and I always say anywhere from 15 minutes to 40 minutes. If a student is very high level, they'll go to the end of the test, and then that means that they will probably take a lot longer. If they don't have a lot of language, maybe 5 minutes, but 15 minutes to 20 minutes is around the average. The reading and writing ones, I say about 45 minutes total. You'll have the reading that they'll do on their own, and then the writing that they have to then physically write or type into the online platform. Yeah.
All right. And your answers are just leading into our next question so beautifully. And so we do have someone asking about the differences between the paper-based IPT and the online IPT.
Yep. So the paper-based ones, you do have to give in person. You do have to have them physically write on it for reading and writing. And then teachers will then grade that, on their own, right? So if it's reading multiple choice, you still have to score it on your own. For oral, you will be in person. You will show pictures and ask questions about that and kind of score how they're doing. And then you will score that on your own as well. For the online APT for oral, listening and speaking, We can be remote, we can be in person, but I'm putting correct or incorrect into the system, and it'll stop when the student has like made too many errors, and that's when the placement will be. So it's automatically graded for oral. And then you'll have that beautiful individual student diagnostic report. The paper-based, you do not get any of those recommendations. With the reading and writing, the same way, the students will take it on their own. They will click the correct answers and it will auto grade. So you'll get the scores pretty much immediately and the recommendations. With writing, they will be able to submit the writing online, but the teachers still need to grade that. Okay.
But that's nice. What is automatically scored? Yeah, with the online IPT. Okay, and folks, we do have time for more questions, so if you've got more, send them in. If not, this is our last one. But so do the online IPT or the regular IPT reports give an indication of what level a student would be in the WIDA framework?
No, it does not correlate exactly to the WIDA framework on the online IPT. But if you generally think about levels as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? If they're the lowest level beginning, right? So that'll be a 1, low, intermediate, 2. So you kind of talk to one of us to help you with that. But generally, WIDA has numbers and IPT has numbers, and they generally correlate by number.
Okay.
But it doesn't say exactly on the report.
Yeah. Right. Okay. But it certainly would be easy enough to correlate there. So
exactly.
All right. Well, thank you everybody who sent in questions. And again, if you've got more questions that come up this afternoon or later in the week, feel free to reach out to Brenda. And again, she'll be happy to chat with you.
And one more thing, Emily, I forgot to mention, if you contact Lori Hill, she can send you some samples of the IPT. So whether that's oral or a reading and writing sample of the test, it won't give you the whole thing, but it'll show you generally what the questions are. So Lori Hill, lhill@ballard-tie.com. You see it here. You can definitely email her and say, could you please send me samples of oral, kindergarten in first grade or something. Then she could send that to you. For me, if you have any questions about our programs, we have digital samples. So demos of Champion for secondary or frames for Fluency links, as well as Carousel and hands-on English. So feel free to say, I really liked blank set of materials, or I have grades K to 5, send me some samples, please. We do have a lot of digital samples that you can teach with your students today. Yeah.
Perfect. Yes, thank you for adding that. Yeah, so again, jot down that information and we will share Lori and Brenda's information with you in the email that we will send tomorrow. That'll include a link to the recording and to the slide deck. So as Brenda said, you can even use the materials that are in this slide deck and try these out with your students right away. So in person or online. So keep an eye out tomorrow for all of these materials. Also in that email will be your certificate of attendance. Be sure to scroll to the very bottom of it. You'll see a big blue button that says My Certificate. Click on that. It can take sometimes as much as 90 seconds for that certificate to load, but it will load. So just let the blue ball spin, go get a cup of coffee, come back, and your certificate will be there. I promise. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Brenda, for being here, and thanks to Ballard and Ty for sponsoring this webinar. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your day, and we're wishing you the best of luck with the school year ahead.
Bye.